Welcome to the Object-Oriented UX podcast, a podcast about tackling complexity head-on, gracefully organizing massive amounts of information, and designing scalable, future-proof, and of course, naturally intuitive object-oriented user experiences. An OUXer is a powerful blend of information architect, business analyst, facilitator, and UX strategist. If this sounds like you or what you aspire to, you are so in the right place. I'm Sophia Prater, UX designer, chief evangelist of Object-Oriented UX, and your host. Let's jump into it. Ewelina Nowakowska, welcome to the OUX podcast.
Yay! Thank you so much. Oh my gosh. Can I fangirl for like a hot second?
Yeah. Well, I'm a big fan of you too, so let's just fangirl together.
This is just so cool. I have to say, when I stumbled upon your Medium article, sort of the dawn of OUX, I felt like I had come across sort of like a problem-solving gold mine. And like I sunk my teeth into it and then found out that you're doing this masterclass certification. I went back to my boss and I was like, look, I'm not even going to try to convince you. I'm just going to ask you for the money to do this. I need this. I need to do this. And she said, of course, yes.
That's awesome. And that was like, we were just talking before we hit record, that was a year ago, you got certified in cohort 6. Yep. And so before that, so it was like a couple months before that you just started kind of sinking your teeth in and self-learning, basically.
Yeah, it was sort of as a response of us growing as a business and us needing to hire more people to do the things that I was doing. I was sort of a unicorn in our division, and I was doing a little bit of design, I was doing a little bit of development, project management. I mean, it was all the works. I was doing UX research, you name it. And my boss essentially at one point, realized that as we need to scale, like, how do we scale that? How do we multiply that? And I wanted something in my arsenal to be able to not be the only person who trains, who is the sort of the I don't even know what to call it, sort of like the link, the only link for growth in the division for UI UX. And so this sort of became not only a way for me to expand my problem solving sort of skills and being able to identify better and work faster at getting results, developing features and our apps just in general, but be able to hire more people and then put them on a path that they could do the same.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm excited to talk about that, but I'm just to kind of back up a little bit. So when you stumbled on OUX and you're like, this is a problem solving gold mine, what was it about OUX that you were like, this is going to help me solve problems?
So in defining OUX for anybody, for whoever's listening, like,
yeah, what is OUX actually? What is OUX in your words? Like, yeah. What, and when you saw it, you were like, what does that mean? What did that mean to you when you saw it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember having to do a write-up at the end of the course, what does OUX mean to you? And I know I probably wrote something super smart sounding in terms of it's an iterative framework and it's a toolkit, which all of that is true, right? It is sort of a cheat sheet and a guide when you get stuck. However, in the grand scheme of things, and I think an analogy, so I'll give an analogy here. OUX to me is a type of mental yoga for problem solving, right? And just like with yoga itself, it's a practice, right? You're not going to just be instantly really good at it. So like even going back to the certification was really eye-opening. It was 10 weeks of learning the process, learning the steps. And I'm still practicing, right? I'm still learning, figuring out what the power moves are in context of the projects, because every project is a little different. You're going to need different supports for different types of projects. If we're developing a feature inside of an existing product, that's going to not rely on so much necessarily discovery as maybe, let's make sure we have a CTA matrix, because if we know teachers and administrators are going to be accessing this feature, but they're going to be using it a little bit differently from a different lens and different perspective, the difference between a teacher and an administrator, that's going to help you. It's going to help you unveil the edge cases, the questions that you still haven't asked. And I think that what OUX in general is going to give you is that mental agility towards asking the right questions at the right time so that you can solve the problem in sort of the fastest way possible.
I love that. It's mental yoga. It like helps you become more flexible with the problem and strengthening. It's like strengthening as well. Like you're stronger, you're more flexible, you're more agile. Mentally when it comes to seeing a problem and being able to kind of like turn it around from lots of different angles. I'll often say like it gives you x-ray vision, or it helps you sort of do 4D chess kind of, you can kind of see through the objects, see the kind of data model. But yeah, I like that. I like that analogy a lot. So when you were getting all excited about this and how this could be problem solving, and also like how you could bring it to your team. And I wanted to ask you about that because you've had a couple people come through the certification. We've had shout out to Sarah Tyson, who got certified in cohort 7.
Yep.
Right. And now we have Kate Aid. Shout out to Kate Aid in cohort 8. So you've been bringing members of your team through. So I'm actually curious, like, what was it specifically about those women, like, or their roles or how they were playing on the team that you were like, these are the people that need to come through this course and learn this methodology?
I mean, I would honestly bring everyone and anyone through this course, whether they're involved UI UX in general, because I think any field that you're in, it helps you even indirectly, even outside of the ORCA. The one thing that I really took away from those 10 weeks is acquiring a sense of fearlessness towards problem solving in general. Your enthusiasm and the way that you lead that course is very infectious, because now when I go into a meeting and I have no idea what I'm walking into, like, I don't have that layer of anxiety that I used to. I know now that I have the supports that no matter what comes out of that meeting, I'll be able to figure it out. Not necessarily by myself, but, with the support of others, because OUX just in general is also very much a team sport, right? It's about collaboration. It's about bringing as many perspectives to the table as possible, as early as possible, because that makes the problem solving all that easier in the long run. Again, you can derive the answer much quicker when you have all the variables, right? So, and it just makes sense, me being a developer in object-oriented programming, like object-oriented UI UX, it just makes sense.
And let's go, because I'm curious, like, you with your technical background, so you think that was part of it, like being able to see, is that what kind of, when you saw object-oriented, you're like, ooh, object-oriented UX, like, I know what object-oriented programming is. What is this? Is that kind of what originally piqued your interest? And then when you started looking at it, was it like the UX, it was like the UX side and the developer side of you kind of coming together?
Yes. So, right now I'm the director of UI UX, but like really director of a bunch of unicorns, myself included, again, because I have a background in development and design and project management and a little bit of everything. It was also the incentive of making sure that we multiply, this skill in every single team member. And just like yoga, when you do it together, it's even better, right? So
yes, yeah. Yeah, I was
Well,
actually, when you do it, yeah, like what was I reading the other day about the power of people moving in unison, actually. Like this is a kind of a weird example, but gosh, I forgot where I was reading this, but it was talking about how I forget which military leader found this out, but I think it was the Romans, actually. It was the Romans that found out that marching in unison, that soldiers could actually go farther. And then they also were applying it to like a dance class or a yoga class where you can just like get this energy with people moving in unison. And when you're in an object mapping session, when you're doing OUX, it's not like everybody's moving in unison or anything, but it does sometimes feel like a dance of kind of like, especially if you've got a couple people who all know OUX and you're standing in front of a massive nested object matrix and you're stealing the Sharpie marker from each other and kind of moving things around. It feels very dynamic. And if you have the ability to be in person, right? I mean, even if you are in something like a mural board or a Miro board, it can feel like that too. But if you're in person, it's just like, it does feel like this kind of like you are embodying the cognition together.
yeah, and you're in it together, which I think strengthens just the core connection in the group too, and the ability for us to, get through the finish line. And I think about a marathon, like how many marathons have you watched on TV and you see the runners help each other, even towards the very, very end, right? It's very infectious. So, making sure that we're all speaking the same language, which is one of the sort of one of the pillars of the OUX process, the ORCA process, is you have to make sure that everybody is on the same page. So it only makes sense to make sure that everybody on that team, or as many people as possible, have the foundation of this way of thinking and problem solving, so that you can kind of feed off of each other. So, not everybody's having, not everyone is, firing on all cylinders at all times, 100% of the time. So there's going to be days where, I may catch something that someone else may not, or vice versa. And I think it's where we have each other's back. So this is an incentive of having more people on your team be certified, or at least do some part of the training. I mean, the Udemy course that you now have available is such a simple way to get out the fundamentals, that can be eye-opening for teams to be able to collaborate and work smarter, not harder, right? So fewer meetings, because the meetings that you are having, like especially the discovery phase, you're asking the right question. And depending on like what you utilize, whether it's, diagramming or even early sketching to move that dialogue forward, to get those answers quicker.
So that's the beautiful picture. All these happy OUXers moving sticky notes around together and solving big problems and exposing all the complexity. When you were bringing OUX, when you first bringing OUX to the American Reading Company, did you get any pushback? Were there any naysayers? Don't name names, but like, what were the kind of things maybe that you were hearing, or did adoption happen relatively easily?
It happened really easily because I think everyone was on board that we needed to have common language. And I think that's really where it came down, what it came down to. So I think everyone was open to it, but also in my strategy, I would never walk into a meeting to say, okay, well, the OUX or the ORCA process works like this, and we're going to do this bit today. No, it's all very indirect. It's all very contextual, and it's all very sort of seamless, right? The way that I know that how the discovery process sort of is supposed to work, and the things that you're supposed to derive out of those phases, help me direct to ask the right questions. So it's almost like an invisible veil. And some of the diagramming that I've done, even at a very minimum level, I've maybe kept those to myself because they help me unravel the parts and pieces so that they would make them their way into either the prototype or the sketch that would then be presented to the team and then iterated over to make sure that everybody's on board and everybody's on the same page. Because that's a little different. And I know every company, works with prototyping and sketching in a different way. I have tried to use it as a way of dialogue, as a way of, a picture is 1,000 words. So we would kind of do early sketching, but sort of like a hybrid between the thinking and the sort of the wrangling of the questions and the issues that we're running into, and then kind of infuse them in early sketching so that we could have stakeholders look at an artifact and give concrete feedback, that wasn't so nebulous, because sometimes it's really, really hard to think abstractly, especially now that we're in a remote setting where most of us are sitting on Zoom. It's really hard. Like, I wish we were all in the same room and had a whiteboard and we could do this. And even in FigJam, which is what we use relatively often, and Excalidraw, which I highly recommend, it's a great tool, can be limiting, right? Because you're not having that kind of dynamic interaction like you would in person.
So when you're working with stakeholders in the business, so what I'm hearing is even before you get into any of the OUX work and the ORCA process, and just pause real quick. For anybody listening and who's just jumping into the podcast and doesn't know what ORCA is, that stands for Objects, Relationships, Calls to Action, and Attributes. It's basically the iterative process that aligns to the OUX philosophy. So, so you actually, when you're working with your stakeholders in the business, so you'll start with some loose sketches and then go into the ORCA process and then do more sketches afterward?
Yeah, it's very iterative. I would say it's an ongoing cycle. And I think that's what makes the ORCA process so powerful, is that you don't have to go through beginning to the end once, right? You can go through it iteratively and as many times as you need to, so that you can calibrate when you don't have all the requirements figured out, when you don't have everything sort of in alignment, when it's still a moving target of what it is that we're trying to do and how many things that we're trying to accomplish all at one time, right? In terms of priorities, like what's MVP, what's phase 1, what's phase 2. Sometimes that comes more cyclical. And so we can run through that ORCA process, kind of speed through certain parts, pause on certain parts where it's contextually, where it makes more sense to unravel, and then cycle back around. And then at one point, it's like sifting flour. At one point, you're going to end up having sifted through, all of it. I'm thinking baking them right now. I'm like hungry or something.
Cookies. Okay, so that's really interesting. So what is how do the sketches evolve? Like this first sketches that you might end up doing to get that initial feedback, and then sketching that might happen after doing some OUXing, doing an object map. Do the sketches change a lot? Like how does it evolve? How does the solution evolve?
Sometimes, again, it depends on, sometimes it's a means of variance, where we start out with one direction and then realize, going through the process a couple of times that this direction is not going to work, because we have, again, CTA matrix is a good example, right? We have two different types of users. Teachers are going to use it this way, administrators are going to use it that other way. And they're looking at, and we want to have a consolidated screen where both are going to get something out of it. So sometimes it is iterative in that variant process, where we start out with sort of funfetti on the wall, and then evolve it, refining it. It's almost like the ORCA process, or those tools that allow you to really sculpt and mold a vision into a final product, which is really powerful because through that process, we're involving, stakeholders who have the pedagogical aspect. Then we have developers who are in here. They're always listening in for any edge cases where it's like, what you're asking for might take a long time to develop, or it's really complicated, or, depending on what's already in place in terms of the infrastructure or the foundation of the software in general, like what we can or cannot do. So having all those voices present through that process is really powerful. But that's part of the OUX and the ORCA process, is that it invites everyone to the table. And so again, I think I have been really fortunate in my position because we have always been a tight-knit group, and we have always invited everyone to the table, where we have always believed at ARC that diversity, and perspectives is what makes everything better. And so this just kind of amplified it. It's like, of course, that's what we need to do. We need to invite everyone to the table so that we hear every aspect of it and then cycle through it enough times to feel like you have something that's solid, and then pilot that, and then refine, and then, again, move through the cycles over and over.
So a question that I get all the time, and I'd love to hear your answer to this, is how do I convince people to take the time to do this? Because it feels like, and you mentioned at the top of our call that it helps you actually work faster, which I believe too. Like it helps you work even faster and get to your, just cut out a bunch of rework. But when whether it's like the business, or I mean, how did you actually, I guess an even more like tactical question, how do you actually, like, let's get down into the details. Like, how do you actually integrate this work? Like, how do you set it up? Are you doing half-day workshops? Are you doing an hour here, an hour there? Like, how are you weaving this in with all the other stuff that you have to do at a product company? You got to do eventually you got to do some wireframes, right? You got to do a prototype. You got to maybe test that prototype. You got to get developers in there. How do you weave this in with within all the other work? How does it fit?
Some of that is context, and some of that is say the thing, where we're all constantly saying, okay, we're probably going to need to do a CTA matrix for this part because we're running into issues where we can't say for certain exactly how different the two roles are going to affect this final product, right? And again, it's a context is key to this part, but it's always at the tip of our tongues in any meeting and any huddle that we have. We're always bringing OUX up, like, challenging the ideas of even, we have dedicated sessions with my team where we try to pull each other's prototypes apart, where we try to infuse, okay, if we think this is the right direction, what would be the wrong direction? And it's sort of like an indirect way at accessing OUX, because sometimes doing things the wrong way can lead you to realizing what the right way is. And so anything goes, right? But it's always from the perspective of what objects are we working with? What are their relationships to each other? And also in terms of systems thinking too, we have various apps. How will this one feature in this app potentially affect the grander scheme of the other products? Is it consistent, right? Consistency is another key thing that is, part of the OUX process. And it's always something that at least one person will challenge in a meeting, and it's invited, right? We're inviting each other to challenge the ideas and figuring out what's a better approach to the problem. So we're never challenging each other. It's not a personal thing. It's always, and that requires a really safe space to have people who really understand, put their egos outside the door, sort of thing. So having a really good team that is capable of doing this kind of work, requires that kind of foundation. But again, if everyone's speaking the same language, then you saying, okay, we're going to need a CTA matrix for this part, you're going to get some nods. Yeah, let's try it.
Because everybody knows what that is, and they've seen it be helpful before. So, okay. So let's talk about the CTA matrix. CTA matrix, for those that don't know, it's basically we got your objects across one axis and you got roles across the other axis. And then you can brainstorm what do each of those roles do to all the objects. So for you, what were the roles you mentioned? The teacher, and there was another role,
administrator.
An administrator. Okay, so was this helping not only like looking at like, okay, these are the types of screens that we need to design, or this is how we need to design the screen, but it's also like helping you get into permissions. I'm imagining that permissions is like a thing for you.
Absolutely. Yeah, because you're thinking of, let's say a district administrator has pretty much access to everything in the system, can take a look at what all teachers are doing and looking at performance throughout the system of how teachers are doing. So it trickles down sort of like layers. A teacher will only have access to their own sort of ecosystem with their set of students and their data, or versus a district administrator will have sort of, it's essentially a model of, any system where you have an administrator and then you have certain layers of users who have sort of a hierarchical style of permissions.
Do you have any, so one thing that we've been struggling with is something that I've been calling object relative roles. So roles that are actually like depends on which instance of the object what the permissions are. So for example, like if you have a class object, so you've got teachers and teachers have classes, you might have, okay, there's this class object and there's the teacher of this class, but then there might also be like the potentially like a curriculum admin, but they're only a curriculum admin for class A, B, and C, and somebody else is the curriculum admin for class D, E, and F, and they can have different permissions on the class, whether basically their role is relative to the class. Do y'all have any of that?
Not so much. I think we're
Oh, lucky.
we're a little more and maybe we do that intentionally because we don't want to overcomplicate the type of data. I think it really comes down to the oversight hierarchically. Teachers need to like district administrators need to know what is happening in their schools, right? And they can drill down to the teacher level. That then allows for the teacher to just have access to sort of their own while I'm thinking about that, there are always edge cases, right? There are instances where certain teachers can have certain amount of access between each other's classrooms for various reasons.
There you go. Yeah.
But it's very rare. So,
but that would be one of those like object relative roles where you could have like a teacher and then like a co-teacher or like a teaching assistant or something like that. So I might be the teacher on one class, but a teaching assistant on another class. So like, I don't have, my role isn't teaching assistant across the system. Well, I could be, it comes up a lot in like any kind of like project management software or something like that, where you've got this idea of a project or a team, and I could be a member of one team, but I'm the lead of another team, and I'm a collaborator on this project, but I'm just a viewer on this other project. And I'm just like, I was just curious if you had any ideas on like documenting that in a CTA matrix where you have system level roles and then you have object relative roles. I think that's like the holy grail of figuring out permissions, but we're just not there yet.
No, but once we actually get a little deeper into it, I will be in touch because it would be good to noodle over that one and potentially, come up with some ideas how to wrangle that part, or at least, represent it.
Because it could even they could go like when your roles start getting additive, like in the OUX forum, it's with Mighty Networks, it's a huge mess because there's now like, you can be a host of the space, but I can actually end up becoming, I can be, even though if I've created, I'm a host of the network, but then there's spaces within, and I can actually, if I leave a space, I actually have no way to edit it anymore. Even though I'm like a super admin, I've created the network. I could actually, trick myself out of having permissions on spaces if I'm just like, I want to leave this space because I don't want alerts or something on this space. And then I find out like, oh man, like I can't actually edit this, or I can't invite people to this space because yeah. So like figuring out that hierarchy of like, if I am, if I'm a super admin, what does that mean for object relative roles? So it's like almost like we need another axis or something in the CTA matrix.
Yeah, and I'm actually thinking this is not related to the products that we develop, but we use Atlassian's Jira product for project management. And I have noticed that they have multiple different levels of administrator tiers in terms of permissions. And I have definitely run into some similar things where it's like, okay, well, which administrator role do I need to really have this particular access to do this particular thing? And then sometimes it just feels like whack-a-mole. It's like, okay, well, let's try this one. Can I do it now? No. All right, let's try this one. Can I do it now? No. Okay.
I was working from our little small town coffee shop yesterday. There was a group of women, and they were like, I guess like marketing professionals working with a nonprofit. They were like having their work meeting there, and they were talking about MailChimp. They were in MailChimp, and they were just like, they weren't using the word permissions, but they're like, oh, it's just it's the hardest thing about it. You just don't know who can do what in this system. And I'm just overhearing them, and I'm like, this is the biggest problem in UX is permission. So the CTA matrix helps. I feel like it could even become more robust if we like somehow figure out a way to document these object relative roles. I mean, you could just make multiple CTA matrices, right? But I feel like showing the interplay between like, what is your system level role and then what is your object relative role could like really help. There's definitely something there that.
Yeah, because otherwise you're gonna end up with the tesseract, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Not a matrix anymore.
No, we need to like get our Oculus on and do it in three dimensions or 4 dimensions or something to be able to figure it out. Cool. Okay, I've got a couple more questions for you, but I actually like to turn it around sometimes and just see like, do you have any questions for me? Is anything that you're like working on or anything you want to talk about?
So I'm so curious that one of the great things about having more people take the certification is that I know how iterative your certification process is, overall. And so, what kinds of things have you learned over the years, over these cohorts that you feel is going to, do you feel like it's in a place where you're going to have more like, I'm always curious about what's next. Like, do you feel like you're refining the process, or do you feel like you're exploring and expanding on the ORCA process?
Yeah, I mean, as far as the certification, I mean, I really think like the dust has settled on it. I think the content is there, but there's still like areas that what we're doing is we're just providing more and more support around like frequently asked questions, frequent mistakes. Like, we have our mentors, and what I'm working on now, I always have like a project that I'm doing during a cohort. So what I'm doing for cohort 8 is I'm really working on giving more materials to the mentors. So every assignment now has a rubric for the mentors to look at, to be like, these are the common mistakes. Like, are there objects really objects in object discovery? Like, do the instances make sense? Do the lists make sense? Like, so it actually like sends them through a rubric so they can be like, okay, this person is basically red light, yellow light, green light for every single assignment. And we have this amazing dashboard in Notion where I can kind of see, I have that level of visibility, so I can much easier see people that need help. and I can get in there and kind of, we're basically triaging. So just having better systems in place. So, and we OOUX that, right? So OOUXing our Notion mentor dashboard, basically, doing that with Marisa Montaldi. Shout out to her. She's the one that built it. We built an object map for it. And, having objects like the mentor pod, the mentees, the mentor, the cohort, the assignments, all the assignments are being pulled in from Mighty Networks, pulled into Notion through an API. So having like frequently asked questions right there in context, having a rubric. I'm not making a video for the mentor. So I basically go through like, this is how I go through each assignment, just so that they're really empowered. So people are just getting really, really good feedback. So that's a big piece of what I've been working on. And yeah, that's going to be, I think, really revolutionary. And also like we're tightening up the design challenges too. We're not letting people do custom design challenges anymore unless you're getting recertified, because those just like, so we're just like making sure we have really good design challenges that are perfect for the learning environment, and that have been actually played out all the way through. So we actually have answer keys for all our design challenges now that the mentors can see. So they kind of like know people are tracking. So just making it like, just really making it a better experience. And then thinking about like where there's rough patches, like getting out like more content on tree systems. Like I know that tree systems are really confusing for people. So yeah, just doing like the quizzes was huge. I don't think you had the quizzes in cohort.
Not as many as there are now. I know that we had started on those, and I really enjoyed it because I learn best by reverse engineering sometimes. So the quizzes actually help my understanding, solidify a lot of the understanding, in addition to just listening to the content and of course doing the assignments themselves.
Yeah, the quizzes were a big effort. So you must have just, we added more for cohort 7. But and then really like I'm a big fan of Kathy Sierra and her book Making Users Awesome, Making Users Awesome. I recommend it all the time, and it's a book about learning. It's a book about UX, but it's a book about learning and making users awesome, and making your, like, I feel like the users of OOUX, like my job is to make them awesome and turn them into badasses. So I'm like always looking for better ways to do that. And one of the ways that that she's a big proponent of is just giving really good examples. So that's another big effort, is how can I give better examples, more examples. One thing I hope that we're going to be doing for is probably just going to be people that are certified or in the self-paced masterclass. We have enough people now to basically, I think, make this make sense, but doing like half day workshops, but it's just working sessions with everybody like already knows OOUX. So I'm not training you on OOUX, I'm giving you a design challenge, and then we're like going into breakout rooms and going through it. So just giving people more opportunities to practice.
There it is. There's that yoga.
Yeah, practice. So yoga classes. I'm basically trying to figure out OOUX yoga classes that would be like on a monthly basis or something, like Monday afternoons, the first Monday of the month or something like that, doing like a 4-hour workshop where I just throw a design challenge and we break up into groups, and 30 minutes in the group, come back and ask your questions, present to the entire group, and just kind of, so I'm working on stuff like that.
Love that. Do you feel like you're leveraging fewer apps? The one thing that I really loved when I was taking the cohort was the exposure to all these different apps like Notion that I've never used, that had never used before, Miro, a bunch others. Like I was pretty much just fixed on Figma, and a little bit of FigJam that we had, started to utilize. But it was really cool to get that kind of exposure overall of different tools, because I noticed for different diagramming, I liked different tools. It's kind of want to pick the best tool for the job. So
yeah, I'm glad you say that. A lot of people are like, it's too overwhelming, there's so many different tools, but The reason is because I wanted to become tool agnostic, because it was like
Right.
the first couple iterations I was using Trello, and Trello was just like, it was like a deep part of the course was like learning Trello for object mapping. And that was a mistake. So I had to cut all that out, because I was like, I don't know what the next tool is. Like, we're using Notion now. A lot of people are using Airtable. I actually now am gravitating sometimes to using Airtable. It's like, I
Mhm.
kind of like go back and forth between Notion and Airtable. Um, and Whimsical as well. Like, there's just so many tools, and I just want people to use whatever tool's most comfortable to them. But we have a growing repository of templates and like all the tools. And of course, I've got my wheels turning on like what the custom software would look like.
Mhm.
Um, I want to build that one day. And more I'm seeing, and I guess I'll just go ahead and say this publicly, but my wheels have been turning. And is it, because at first I was like, oh, the custom software is just for OOUXers. That's going to be at this point still a relatively small user base. I don't think it's like the user base isn't enough to constitute going and making custom software for it. But I was recently writing a ORCA sprint facilitator guide, and I started writing it in Google Docs. I was
Mhm.
like, man, but this thing has structure to it. Like, I'm writing about workshops because it's a series of multiple workshops. In those workshops, we have sessions. And within a session, you have methods within the session, because you might have a method for whether it's a big group or a little group, or it's remote or in person. So the session being the nested object matrix, but then multiple different methods that you can pick from to actually run that session. And each of those had structure. And so the Google Doc, I was like, crap, like this is just, and I was going between changing the structure and changing the content, like content structure, popping back and forth between it. So I ended up moving into Airtable and then trying to basically zhuzh it into place through interfaces, using Airtable interfaces. And it was just a crap show. Like, it was just, I mean, it was, to use some OUX lingo, like, Airtable interfaces makes it really easy to create shapeshifters. You have to be very cognizant. It makes it very easy to create masked objects, very easy to make isolated objects. Like, the connections are all there. That's what Airtable does so well. And then it doesn't actually connect it very well once you do it in interfaces. And then printing it is like nearly impossible. So anyway, long story short, it got me to thinking, like, could the OOUX software actually be a Notion / Airtable competitor?
Mhm. Absolutely. I'm going to say yes. And I would use it. I would totally, shut up and take my money.
I mean, like, it's kind of, it's kind of like the universe is like pushing me in this direction. Like, it seems like big and scary, but I've definitely already started OUXing the OUX software, which is a glorious meta challenge. Um, yeah. So what do you think? What do you think is the what would you like to see as some of the next steps, next chapters for OUX?
Hmm. I think what you're doing in terms of consolidating to make the learning easier is really key, so that you're focusing on learning the fundamentals of the process rather than getting hung up on tools or ways to get at that institutional knowledge that you're going to gain from learning what that ORCA process really does. The one thing I remember when both Sarah and Kate, just before they embarked on their cohorts, they asked me, what projects should I pick? And I said, well, you probably could pick whatever project you wanted to. And they both, like, their initial, well, I have this custom project that I would like to, I was like, hold that thought. Like, pick a project, and maybe preferably a project that we will all have done, because we can help each other figure out the parts of the learning rather than putting all that intention into the figuring out the project itself.
Yeah,
um
yeah, exactly.
that I think has helped.
There's so going back to Kathy Sierra, she recommends this book called Breakthrough on Skis. So it's a book about skiing, and I am a skier as well. And I was like, I love Kathy Sierra, and she's recommending me a book about skiing, which is actually my book about learning. So I finally read this book, and he says something in the book about learning on the bunny slopes, which I think is so interesting. We think about like, oh, to get better at something, you have to like, it has to be hard. Like it has to, which it does have to be hard. But if you're trying to learn a new technique, you want to learn it on the green slopes. You want to learn it on the bunny hill. You don't try to learn a new technique and new positioning and basically you don't try to learn like really good alignment while you're on the black diamonds. Or if you're like, even if you're like weightlifting, like you learn your alignment when you have very little resistance and little weight, and then you add the weight. And it's just like, it kind of like was a big wake up call to me, like, I actually need to make the design challenges slightly easier, so that they can really just focus on the learning aspect of it instead of trying to like, solve the problem too.
Yeah. Or create like, a realistic project, which it doesn't matter for the purpose of learning. It could be whatever. I mean, it could be about Care Bears for all we know, right? I love Care Bears.
Oh my gosh, a Care Bear design challenge would be awesome. It's almost like I kind of want to make them like even like a little bit silly, a little bit fun, just so it's like really does feel like you're playing in a sandbox. You can make mistakes. It's not about, and I try to reiterate, like, it's not about solving this particular problem, right? Like, it's awesome if you get a good case study out of it, which usually you will get a good case study through the course of the 10 weeks. But really it's about like playing with the methodology. So yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I think that's it. And I hope for, the future of OUX is now with the Udemy course that you have out, which is excellent, by the way. If you're listening and you want to get a deep dive into it, please, it's a really affordable way to get into the fundamentals of it. Even though the certification process, being in a room full of professionals from around the world, learning this together there's nothing like it. I think that was really eye-opening too, of, we had professionals from Adobe, Capital One, Apple, all these either, really big companies too. We're all facing the same problems and we're all learning together, sort of, flat level of how to solve them together.
Yeah. And that's like a huge thing of why we've also, I don't know if you noticed, we merged the self-paced masterclass and the certification. It's all in the OUX forum now with like tiers. So hopefully like we're just trying to bring everybody together. So even if it's like not during a certification or you're just enrolled in the self-paced masterclass, you can still come in and join those conversations and trade notes with just like other nerdy people who are just gluttons for complexity. Just get themselves into situations where you would need OUX. That's the kind of people hanging out there. So
I love that. I'm not quite there yet. I can't say I'm glutton for problem solving, but I've definitely, through your course and through your enthusiasm, have learned to like approach it with less anxiety. Let's put it that way.
Oh, I beg to differ. You have gravitated to ed tech. So because you've gravitated to ed tech, you are a glutton for complexity. All right. I mean, anybody that gets into healthcare, education, or finance, basically, it's like you're asking for it. But now you've got a tool. You've got tools. So yeah. Ewelina, it has been absolutely amazing having you and just catching up and getting to see your face.
This has been fun.
Been really, really fun. So everybody out there, happy OUXing, and yeah, let's call it a night. Thank you so much for listening. I truly hope you enjoyed this episode. Please visit objectorientux.com/podcast for show notes. Our soundtrack is Fighter by Ruby Bell, courtesy of Sugaroo Records. Happy OUXing!